Good morning and good afternoon for those tuning in today. Hello for a very special edition, community conversation of MLK's Forgotten Call for Economic Justice. I am your host today, Benjamin Vann, the founder and CEO of Impact Ventures. Thank you all for tuning in this afternoon, this cold afternoon, wherever you're calling in from. I didn't expect things to turn the way they did with the weather, but I'm sure everyone is finding a nice, cozy place to listen in to today's session. So if you're streaming in now from Facebook or LinkedIn or YouTube, welcome to this conversation. Again, I'm excited to bring our very special guest to the front to really dive into this conversation that I think most of you will benefit from and find insightful. As we kind of got into our discussion today on our topic, the context behind this event here is to hopefully illuminate some of the ideals, the messages that Martin Luther King spoke about during his time in leadership during the civil rights movement that maybe are not as popular or as not as widespread. I know that every year we tend to, as Americans, take the day off and spread our reflections around MLK's dream and what he meant to us as individuals, typically popular by quotes and speeches and sermons that he gave during his time. But I want to bring to light some of those things that he talked about that I feel like are important and we should be carrying today in terms of manifesting and realizing the dream that King spoke about. And so for those that are tuning in and this is your first time introduction to myself or to Impact Ventures as an organization, I wanted to just provide a quick overview. If you are a small business owner or entrepreneur out there that's tuning in, we have some exciting opportunities for you as well. This week, we actually have our information session that is going to be going on talking about our financial readiness program. So if you are an existing businesses, an entrepreneur that you're looking to secure capital and want to get your financial house in order, this program is designed for you. But for those that are new to Impact Ventures, at Impact Ventures, we believe genius is everywhere. However, an access and opportunity is not. We exist to remove the social and economic barriers for women in low to moderate income and communities of color to build generational wealth through education, capital, and community. We envision a world where access, opportunity, and prosperity is shared for all. And we do this work through our three pillars of inclusive entrepreneurship, where we accelerate the genius of individuals through culturally responsive educational programs that equip next generation business leaders with the tools and resources they need to thrive in the 21st century economy. Ecosystem building, where we build inclusive communities by facilitating intentional connections through events that ignite action and meaningful dialogue, like such as events today. And our last pillar of integrated capital, where we coordinate the use of different forms of financial and non-financial resources to support the growth of minority-owned businesses throughout North Texas and across the U.S. Our team is led by myself, Donna Henry, who is our Senior Program Director, Melissa Ogden, who is our Director of Philanthropy, Anissa Khan, our Marketing and Communications Manager, and Catherine White, our Senior Community Manager. And we're supported by a host of partners, community partners, corporate and foundation partners throughout the ecosystem that fuel this work and make it possible. And so we're so grateful for their support and their belief as well in our mission. And as I mentioned, our flagship programs, our financial readiness program, that's going to be kicking off in March this spring, and then we'll bring it back in the fall. This program is for small business owners and entrepreneurs that are existing businesses. Our retail readiness program is for those consumer product and good enterprises with an emphasis on retail readiness. And then we have our venture readiness program, which is a 6-week program supporting early stage tech or tech-enabled enterprises. A little bit briefly about just our impact. We launched our first accelerator program in 2020. We've so far completed 7 cohorts and supported over 214 entrepreneurs and engaged over 255 mentors and created 355 jobs. Those founders have gone on to raise north of $18.5 million in external capital, and we've deployed over $1.2 million of capital of our own in grants, debt, and equity investments over the past 2.5 years. And so this is some of the work that we've been quietly doing here in North Texas, and we're excited to bring our brand and bring our mission and our work to the public for those that are interested in our work. So if you know an entrepreneur, or if you are an entrepreneur or small business owner, tune in to, if you visit our website at impactventures.co, that's CO, there's no M at the end, it's .co. You'll be able to find our upcoming financial readiness program, and you'll be able to attend that info session this Thursday. And so with that being said, I want to bring my special guest onto the stage, and I'll do an introduction of him, a man who needs no introduction, but for those that are tuning in for the first time, I want to introduce you all to Pastor Michael W. Waters, who, for me, I like to have informal and formal mentors, and Michael Waters has been a informal just through his actions and his words to me over the past years. He's a man of many hats, a man who loves hip hop like myself as well, and so we can dive all into those things. But I really want to give shine some light to this brother's background as a pastor, professor, award-winning author, activist, and social commentator. He appeared on ABC Nightline, AJ's BB World News, CBS in the Morning, C-SPAN, Fox Soul, NPR, any publication, news, Vice on HBO that you can think of. He's also been featured by the Associated Press, the Chicago Tribune, CNN, Dallas Business Journal, Ebony Magazine, Epitome Magazine, Essence Magazine, Faith and Leadership, GQ Magazine, the Huffington Post. I mean, the man has been everywhere, and his voice has echoed across the world for social justice. I'm going to stop right there because there's so much more, but I really want to get into this discussion. So good afternoon, Pastor Michael Waters. Go ahead and introduce yourself as well.
Listen, I'm just happy to be here. Thank you for creating this opportunity to talk about Dr. King's economic vision. Let me commend you, Mr. Vann, for your tremendous efforts and the impact ventures, the contributions that you make to our community. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Well, we kind of dived into this a little bit, but Dr. King would have been 95 years old this year. And oftentimes, again, we gather this time of year and personally, and I'll speak from my own experience, that sometimes I feel like we go through the motions of celebrating our leaders in our community, our civil rights leaders, our economic justice leaders, et cetera, our community leaders. And we typically, like to cherry pick, some of the quotes and some of the messages that Dr. King spread throughout his lifetime. But there's some messages that weren't so popular, but were also impactful, right? They may not have been popular, but they were impactful. And so I want to take this opportunity to dive into some of those things that Dr. King had talked about and believed in, but maybe weren't at the forefront of something like the I Have a Dream speech. So for you personally, what are some of the thoughts and reflections that come up when this holiday comes around?
I think it's an opportunity to reclaim King. I think that King's words, as you've mentioned, have been puppeted, almost like a ventriloquist, putting your words through the mouth of Dr. King. And in fact, he was far more radical, if we use those terminology, to revolutionizing who we are in community with each other. And so I believe that this day, and I'll be honest with you, the day is largely for some people become a day of service, and that's appropriate. Certainly he was one who served and found value in helping other communities. I think that's appropriate. It's a time of marches and speeches. Okay, that's fine. But also it should be a time of remembering and pushing forward the policies that he was willing to risk his life for. And I think that's where we are not meeting the mark. Certainly, it's much easier to schedule some type of food drive or to volunteer your service to support some nonprofits. Certainly, it's easier to have some type of program, but to actually push forward the policies that he was willing to die for is something I think that we far too often miss the mark. And so for a time like this, and the reason I'm happy to be with you, I want to reclaim King. I want to reclaim those policies and those commitments that in many ways we have yet to reach.
Wow. I love how you frame that, reclaim King, almost as if he was taken from us, both literally in the in the human, but also in the spirit and in his ideals, and in terms of reclaiming what he stood for, and what he truly believed his dream represented. And so when you talk about reclaiming, what are some additional things when you say policy that you feel we can reclaim, right? Like with some of the actionable items that come from reclaiming his legacy.
Well, Ms. Vann, I served on a panel a few years ago. We were talking about African American political theology. And one of the panelists said something that I never forgot. And in fact, it so concerned me that I had to mount a response. He dared to say in that space that Dr. King had a dream, but he didn't have a plan. And that is nonsensical. Everything connected to Dr. King had a very clear purpose and plan. Even the I Have a Dream speech. Now, I love I Have a Dream. I'm currently pursuing a second doctorate. I'm doing a PhD in African American preaching and sacred rhetoric. And so these words are very important to me. So you look at Dr. King's speech, and many times we focus on what we might call the celebration. There was a woman we've got to give a nod to. It was a Black woman by the name of Prathia Hall, a dynamic colleague, contemporary of Dr. King, who was praying one day. And she was praying, and in her prayer, she said, I have a dream. And that's where Dr. King got that from. He got it from a Black woman. So we want to give a nod to Prathia Hall. Prathia Hall was praying, I have a dream. In Detroit in 1963, Dr. King delivered a speech, and he first tried out that idea of I have a dream. And Mahalia Jackson happened to be during that speech. So while he is on the Washington Mall on August 28th of 1963, and he's delivering his speech, he's the last speaker at the end of what has been a long and hot day. Mahalia Jackson, sensing the need to uplift the community, lifts out a word to Dr. King. She's in earshot of him as he's speaking, and she says, tell them about the dream, Martin, of course.
Yeah.
And that's where he extemporaneously moves into that frame of I have a dream. And that's very important, very powerful portion. But just as powerful as the close, the celebration is the very beginning. Mm-hmm. And he speaks to why they're there. Remember, this is the March on Washington for jobs, right? Mm-hmm. Jobs. Economics is very centered, right, in terms of why they've come there. And he says, we've come to demand a check. This country owes us something that it is yet to pay out. Now, what does that sound like to me? And in fact, I want to make an argument for Dr. King was a proponent of reparations. Mm-hmm. That's certainly one of the more tense conversations in American political life. It's being enacted in some municipalities. They're trying to do some things to correct their historical harm. You have universities and colleges, Ivy League schools that are doing the same. But that's just one. Dr. King promoted this idea of reparations. I'll give you another. And I brought some things here with me because one of the challenges I think at this time is that we think we know Dr. King, but we don't really, because we've not read his words. So this is one of my favorite of his books, Why We Can't Wait. Okay, this was written after the Birmingham struggle in 1963. And in this book, he talks about the need for a congressional act for the disadvantaged, right? So remember, the civil rights movement is not just about harmonious singing and marching together, right? It's about changing the very laws of this nation. Mm-hmm. And so one of the things that he promoted again was this congressional act for the disadvantaged, and so much more that I hope we can get into today. But those are just two things that are low-hanging fruit that were part of Dr. King's economic vision for our nation.
Wow. You said a ton there, but I think I hear a bit of an echo. Maybe you have another screen up there, but one of the things that I pull out when you talk about reparations and you talk about the march and you talk about I Have a Dream, and that was such a small but significant part of, like you said, that long day, but we choose to only zero in on that very small but impactful part. And really, I feel like for us, it can be, we're doing ourselves a disservice, right? Of not truly leaning into all of who he was and all of who he was teaching us, right? They were sermons, they were messages and things, but these were lessons that that they were teaching us to govern ourselves by. And I think that is so powerful that we have an opportunity, right, through these books that you shared, and I had them pull that up on the screen. Why We Can't Wait, as a resource that we can always do the work afterwards, right? We have an opportunity, we have a chance once we have the information to do something about that. And I think that's where we are in this space and time, is that we have the information. Now it's up to us to do something about that. So
and then hopefully have the courage to enact it, right? So we have the information, but now will we courageously move together to put them into practice?
And one thing you said towards the end of that is that while it was the end of that segment or that historic moment, it was the beginning, right? It was the beginning of an era. And so let's talk about the beginning of this new era. I believe it was called the Poor People's Campaign, or the Poor People's March. Talk about some of King's more futuristic ideas that he was coming into this new revelation of his work.
Sure. Well, in fact, I'd like to share with you one of the artifacts. My wife and I have a collection of artifacts for our history and movement that are very important to us in the work that we do. This is actually the final poster.
Wow.
This is an original from 1968, a Poor People's Campaign. You see Dr. King centered there. And this was, a part of the unfinished work when they were getting ready to go to Washington, D.C. in 68. So I just wanted to share that with you. The gentleman who allowed me to acquire it from him, he said he didn't want it to go to anyone that wouldn't use it for just purposes, move it forward. Yeah. So since he was so kind to let us obtain it, I want to make sure that I do my part in sharing it. Can we back up just a little bit, though? Because I think the Poor People's Campaign clearly kind of comes to the fore when we think about economic policy. But in Reclaiming King, I want to suggest that Dr. King really had a continuum that from the very beginning of his involvement in the movement that moved through all the way to the end of his life in his commitments, right? So another book, here it is, Stride Toward Freedom. This happens to be my favorite of Dr. King's books. This is his first book, Stride Toward Freedom, The Montgomery Story. This is a very important portion of our collection because if you can see it, I'll try to get it to where you might see it. You see that the signature of Dr. King is actually included. So this is a signed copy of Dr. King's very first book, Stride Toward Freedom, coming out of Montgomery. And of course, they wanted to have the opportunity to sit at the front of the bus. Certainly, there was an indignity that had been assigned to them in being placed at the back of the bus. But at the end of the day, it was an economic movement, okay? They recognized that as a Black community in Montgomery, they were paying for the indignities that they suffered. And so instead of continuing to put their money in a system that treated them as a second-class citizen, they instead pooled their money together as a community. And they formed, which I think is really the genius of the Montgomery bus boycott, they formed their own taxiing company, right? And it was so effective that they really didn't need to go back to the buses, right? Wow. They created job opportunities for drivers who were moving people across the city of Montgomery. One of our dear friends from Montgomery, the Harris family, Richard and Vera Harris, Richard Harris passed many years ago. Vera Harris recently passed. We still have a relationship with her daughter, Valda Montgomery. Her father, Richard Harris, was in fact a pharmacist, but he also served as one of the operators of the Montgomery bus boycott. He owned a pharmacy downtown, which also had a lunch counter. And so instead of being harassed on the streets, Black people could come into his establishment. They could eat at the counter. He would call in their rides, and then someone would pick them up and take them where they needed to go, right? That was really the genius of the Montgomery bus boycott, is they understood that their collective power in pooling their money together, they didn't need to continue to support the system. And in many ways, that was outlawed. Okay, can I give you another piece?
Yeah. Yes.
Initially, the initial funding for the Montgomery bus boycott came from the Atlanta Life Insurance Company in Atlanta, Georgia. The Atlanta Life Insurance Company is the first company to provide investment dollars. It's Black-owned insurance company to help fund the purchase of the vehicles that created the fleet for their taxi company. So effective were they in producing this new taxi company that initially it was outlawed. But let me show you the amazing connections that they had. The Atlanta Life Insurance Company then reached out to Lloyd's of London. And Lloyd's of London then funded their taxi company. Why is that important, right? So at the very beginning, when we talk about the Montgomery bus boycott, so much of the focus is on Rosa Parks, deaconess in the AME Church, tremendous woman who made a tremendous sacrifice. Joanne Robinson and all the students at Alabama State University. This young Dr. King who steps into leadership of the Montgomery Improvement Association. But we are derelict in our responsibilities if we do not remember that the people put forth an economic solution to their persecution, right? They develop a system, right? And there's so much for us to recapture and to bring forward in our memory concerning those efforts. That idea of economic boycott is that line that moves across the civil rights movement. It's the sit-in movements. It's the boycotting on Easter Sunday of putting your money into the downtown stores and causing the business community to move back on their segregationist policies and allow Black people to enter the front door, to sit at the counter, to try on the clothes that they wanted to purchase before buying it, right? Yeah. And so when you get to the Poor People's Campaign, certainly that is a pivot, but I want to suggest that there's this through line of a commitment to economic justice that really has always been there, right? It's just now at this time, as Dr. King so poignantly stated, he says, what good is it to be able to sit at the lunch counter and you can't afford the hamburger? And I think that's the pivot that we see. After fighting for accommodations and access, the next appropriate step, the next necessary step is to really lean into economic justice.
Wow. Man, I think you just educated a lot of us that are tuning in here on just those silver linings there in the points that the history books will shine light on, and not the parts of creating the economic system and witnessing Black people at that time creating and mobilizing their dollars and building economic systems, something that the narrative has always been that we cannot do those things. We are not civilized enough to do those things. And you just gave two examples of us doing that. But I don't think anyone ever knew that that was happening at the time. We just knew that we just taught that Rosa sat on the bus. She didn't want to get up, etc. We knew the boycott, but we didn't know that there was an economic system, a sustainable at that economic system, meaning it's creating jobs, it's providing, it's bringing wealth back to the communities that are practitioners, of that. One of the things that comes to mind, and I think I heard this story. You can fact check me as the historian. That H.J. Russell Senior, which was a very well-known entrepreneur in the architecture, construction, development space in Atlanta, was one of the main benefactors towards the later stage of King's life in terms of being able to put groceries on his table for his family, fly across the country to do speaking engagements or travel. We time out there, being the benefactors and the contributors to the social justice movement behind the scenes that wasn't known at the forefront. I'm not sure if you've ever heard any of those stories, but
well, there was. I appreciate you offering the conversation, because there's always been an economic commitment to push forward justice. And if I could have any critique of some of our current social movements, I don't always see that same sacrifice of personal or communal investment in the movement. And we're not just talking about, well-to-do individuals. Everyone had a part, right? So, for instance, to your point, during the mass meetings, which were very important during the civil rights movement, they would lift up an offering, and you would have domestic workers who would give the monies that they had available to support the movement, and every dollar mattered. Of course, you had individuals of means who contributed larger dollars. You had individuals in the entertainment arena. Harry Belafonte contributed greatly. Eartha Kitt contributed greatly. Marlon Brando contributed greatly to movement. But also, which is very important, there was also international dollars. There were monies, particularly during the bus boycott in Montgomery, that would come from Asia to support the movement. So it's always not just a local movement, but it was an international movement, and people contributed their dollars. And so, of course, I think it's important to remember that there are various ways in which individuals can support movement. And one of the most important ways is financially. But it's also important to understand that Dr. King's own financial straits were because of his dedication to the movement. Dr. King actually earned hundreds of thousands of dollars each year through his speaking engagements. This is something we don't often talk about. Talking about reclaiming King. He had over, the numbers are between 200 and 300 speeches a year. I mean that's almost a speech per day, right? I mean,
without
just
the
an
internet,
amazing
right.
output. And in many places he'd go, there would either be an honorarium or some funding that would come. And Dr. King, this is very important, he wouldn't take the money all for himself. He would put it back into the movement. He would even support organizations that did not fully support him. All right. He was so committed to the movement. And so before he died, Harry Belafonte was one of the individuals who took out a $1 million life insurance policy on him. Wow. In an attempt to make sure that the family had something should he meet his end. And of course he did, which was of no surprise to anyone who was around him. But we got to credit Dr. King and his economic vision, because he understood that he had to put the money back into the movement, and he did so, to his own economic detriment.
Yeah. So let's move into some of the things that I think we can take from today, right? And so, what role does economic justice play in communities? Let's say in today's time, what are some of the things that we can learn from Dr. King's policies and ideals on economic justice, and what role does that play in today's communities?
Well, here's the unfortunate truth. I have a chapter in one of my latest nonfiction books, Something in the Water, a 21st Century Civil Rights Odyssey. And I'm going to talk even about the city in which we reside, the city of Dallas, which is at the bottom of just about every race equity indicator that is available. I know that you know this, but there may be others who do not know this. On April the 25th of 2018, the Urban Institute, which was established through the administration of LBJ, put forth a report where they studied 274 American cities in terms of racial segregation and racial equity. And of those 274 American cities with a population of 100,000 or more residents, Dallas came in dead last. 274 out of 274 American cities, right? That's just one indicator, right? We're talking about the fact that when you look beneath I-30, which is still, we've got to acknowledge, still named after a former mayor of Dallas who was also a member of the Ku Klux Klan. When you look beneath I-30, that has historically been populated by Black and brown people, the median wealth is under $55,000 a year, right? $55,000 a year. You have to earn at least 60,000 almost to break even in our city, which is why the Dallas United Way stated that over half of Dallas residents cannot afford their basic needs. Okay. Those are the realities. And we can go on. And this was before COVID, right? These realities were in place. Right. In our city, we have one of the highest rental prices in the country. 1-bedroom apartment, $1,700. Okay. A report recently came out that said that in terms of realized inflation, rising costs, that no other metropolis in our nation has had a greater impact of inflation than the city of Dallas. And we, unfortunately, we can go on and on. We've not talked about the 100,000 affordable houses that we do not have, that we need right now. The erasure and displacement of communities, okay? And even a report that suggested that in terms of a wealth disparity, which is just widening as we move along. I read a report that says wealth disparity has only been greater now between Black and white people during the days of slavery.
Wow.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is the part of the conversation that we're unfortunately not having, which is that as much progress as we would like to think that we have made, unfortunately, we really have not. And even those persons who believe that they've made tremendous progress, for instance, maybe a Black or brown homeowner, we know that their homes are devalued by billions of dollars because they are Black and brown. Okay. There are a number of studies that have happened. And in fact, investigative reporting that where you've had homes appraised while a Black family was there, and then removing all evidence of a Black presence in that home, appraised again for $100,000 or $1,000 or more.
Yep.
Right. And so until we have that conversation, right, we can't really reclaim King. I believe that there are persons who are suffering in silence behind this cloud of perceived prosperity that really hasn't made its way to the whole of society. So that brings us to Dr. King's movement, or the movement that he was a part of towards the end of his life, the Poor People's Campaign. And Dr. King recognized that this was not just a movement for the liberation of Black people from poverty, but it was for the eradication, the total removal of poverty in all communities. And it would have been, had he lived and had it been fully manifested, I think it would have been the most beautiful movement that we've seen, because it would have included not just poor Blacks from the Delta in Mississippi. It also included poor whites from the Appalachian Mountains. It included poor farm workers who are working in America's breadbasket, migrant workers in California. It really was a picture of America, of individuals suffering under the weight of poverty, getting ready to demand the wealthiest nation in the world to take care of her citizens.
Wow. I love the way you put that, man. That's just powerful to think of in itself, given the circumstances that we are still, like you said, in the same experiencing the same amount of wealth disparity than we had during slavery. Even in our own zip codes that of, we experience the same poverty levels of developing countries.
And the thing that's fascinating to me and really disturbing, there was this major issue in terms of the social sciences. And the social sciences for several decades would argue that in order to break the cycle of poverty, you needed to have a greater education. So we were promoting, get educated, go to school, earn a degree, earn two. That is going to eliminate poverty. But here's the reality. Black American women are the most highly educated people group in our country, and yet they are the most impoverished, right?
Yep.
And so that alone breaks that myth that education alone will end this poverty. We've discovered, and I mean, there's so many data points that need to be brought to the fore, that a Black man in this country in 2024, without a criminal record and with a college degree, has the same job prospects in America as a white man without a degree and a criminal record, right?
Wow.
And those are the realities on the ground. In our own county, Dallas County, Black people earn 54 cents to the dollar of a white person. Our Latino community earns 58 cents to the dollar of a white person right here in our county, right? And so certainly there is a need for economic justice and for reimagining the care that we are to offer to our communities.
And one of the things I often think about as a practitioner of economic justice is how the two alone will not solve nor move the needle on what we deem as equality or equity or a just society. And so how can the two concepts work in partnership with each other? Oftentimes I see more shaming, finger pointing, more you're right, we're wrong from both sides of people who believe in social justice and people who believe in economic justice. But how can they work in partnership? Because as everything you're saying about what King was envisioning was these two worlds coming together, because with them alone, there was no progress that was going to be made. So how can they?
Sure. Well, let me tell you a story. Dr. King is a young man. This is something that he recounts in his writings, and he's working in a factory. And on the factory level are obviously the workers. And he looks around at a community of impoverished white and Black people working side by side. Mm-hmm. And then he looks up, if you will, on the second level, and he sees the owners who are being enriched by the work of those on the ground. Mm-hmm. And he, in essence, says, if the people on the ground ever recognize collectively together that they are being harmed by the same system, they could turn the system on its head. They can revolutionize what's happening to their communities. I'll even go further. Dr. King was so insightful, not the only one. Of course, there are many others who are speaking about these matters, but Dr. King just had such an eloquent way of talking about these economic harms. And one of the things he talked about was how economically harmful slavery was to white people, right? Mm. And that's something we don't always bring to the fore, but there was certainly white poverty during slavery. And there were white farmers who could not compete with the plantation owner down the street, right? Yeah. And so you had individuals who were willing to fight and die for a war to protect a system that actually kept them and their own families impoverished, right?
Much like we see today.
LBJ said it best. I really believe it. Bill Moyers, who was once his chief of staff, the great Bill Moyers, recounts a story of going with Lyndon Baines Johnson on a tour south. And Lyndon Baines Johnson said this, and it's a very powerful statement. He said, if you can convince the lowest white man that he is greater than the Black man, mm-hmm. he will give you the money out of his pocket and swear his allegiance to you. That's basically a paraphrase of what he was saying. Mm-hmm. And that is such a challenging reality, but it's something we need to state with truth. That you ask, how do we change the system? Interestingly enough, there are a number of communities, and I'm specifically talking about lower income white communities in our country who consistently support and vote for policies that are literally killing them. Okay. And they're doing so because we have been divided purposely by this social concept of race, rather than recognizing that we all have the same needs and
Yeah.
that we will either succeed or fail together. It blew my mind, Mr. Vann, when I looked at the pandemic and saw how many white communities, rural communities, were dying in such large numbers because their hospitals had been closed
Mm.
in the terms of economic policy,
Right.
right? To save money. Okay. And in fact, they paid a higher cost for policies that they supported. And so this game of division in our nation has happened for a long time, when in fact there are more people who are experiencing the harms of life together than we recognize. If we could ever have this fusion politics, this coming together of communities to recognize our shared experience of harm, then we can begin to change the policies that harm us.
Wow. You said a mouthful, and I would really love to uh, go ahead and alert those that are tuning in. If you have questions or comments, go ahead and get those ready and chime in the comments, whatever platform that you're on. It'll come through to us, and we'll be able to put your question up. But touch on what you said around the division and the narratives that if we ever knew that we all are in the same boat or in this experiencing the same the impacts of the same system, how powerful we could be together. And I really truly think that is the key of what it takes going forward, and that comes through conversation and changing the hearts and minds of people by having authentic, real conversations around what we all want. And we'll find out that a lot of our wants and needs are the same.
Absolutely.
You know, we want safe schools for our children. We want quality education for our children. We want safe neighborhoods. We want the ability to travel or to buy nice things that make us feel good. We all want and deserve that. And so it's unfortunate that division is the thing that is holding us back, and where people are literally voting against their own interest.
Absolutely. And I think the lie that is promoted is that we live in a time of scarcity where only so many people can benefit.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone can't benefit. Everyone cannot have food on their table. Everyone can't be clothed. Everyone can't have suitable housing in which they can thrive. This is and that's just not true. There are more than enough resources to support everyone. And guess how we know it? Well, guess what? The pandemic pulled a sheet off of a lot of stuff. And we recognize that, you know what, if we really want to provide a tax benefit and give free money, if you will, to families to support them and their children, we have enough money to do that, right? If we want to cancel debts that have been held over families, keeping them from moving forward, we can do that. So there's a lot of things that for many years had been suggested that we could not do, that we discovered, no, we can do if we have the commitment to do it. And let's talk about what Dr. King argued for. We're talking about economic policies. Dr. King argued for not a minimum wage, but in fact, a guaranteed income for all Americans. Dr. King argued for the counseling, right, of foreign debt, right? Dr. King said we cannot solve our housing crisis through private investment alone. We need a substantial investment from the federal government. And also, not only do we need a federal investment that is substantial, we need to create tenant unions to protect the rights of tenants, particularly those in public housing or in low-income housing, who so often are evicted and face other challenges because of housing insecurity. Dr. King talked about, and we're talking about now 60 years ago.
Yeah, UBI.
Right. Dr. King was talking about, in his words, the threats of automation, right? How automation was going to displace so many people from their jobs. So now you go to your grocery store, they have one checker on one line, but everything else is self-checkout, right? And
Or
so
you go to the airport and there's not even a checkout person at all.
my son, we sent him in, oldest son, we sent him in. He was hungry, and we pulled up at a restaurant, told him to run in and grab him something before we made it to our next place. And there was nobody there to service him. He was immediately met with a front-facing interactive board through which he was going to order his food, and then it was going to be served to him. So those jobs are almost gone, if not gone already. And of course, the rise of AI is threatening even more. And Dr. King so wisely said that as these jobs go, which communities do you think are going to be most impacted, right? And so he had a whole nother view for how we can, very powerful, very prophetic in my view, of how we could sustain people in their jobs and give them the means of living and thriving, even in the midst of the threats of automation.
Yeah. I'm going to pull this question in. This is from Casey Thomas. How can the city of Dallas racial equity plan address the inequities in the city?
Well, I think the plan, from what I've read, what I've seen, has done a very good job of articulating what the issues are. And in fact, I actually think that Dallas does a fairly good job, I'm speaking more broadly, of speaking to data points and identifying the various issues that are before us as a community. Where I don't see the level of courage necessary to bring about change is, in fact, enacting the policies that can address the issues on the ground, right? There always seems to be the issue of challenge. So I know, for instance, there is a push now in terms of investments for affordable housing and a bond that is there. But the city also said, there are individuals representing the cities who said that this number being proposed falls well short of what we actually need to bring about the change.
Right.
So it's like bandaging a gushing wound that's not going to really push forth the equity that we need and the changes that we need. So I'll show you another book. I think I brought it over. Maybe I left it. I left it over here on this other desk. The Kerner Report from 1968. And that I want everyone, stop what you, if you don't do anything else today, go online and order the Kerner Report from 1968. That was written by the Kerner Commission, put together by the executive order of Lyndon Baines Johnson in 1967. Dr. King basically called this report a physician's prescription for the ills of our nation.
Can you spell that for us?
The Kerner, Kerner, the Kerner Report.
Kerner Report.
Yes, it is named after. Thank you so much. Here it is. Here's the Kerner Report, National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. Okay, this is a book that is filled with action. Establishment of neighborhood city halls. I'm just opening one. Negro unemployment. You name it. Local government structure. This document was put together primarily by white men in the late 1960s, which makes it all the more phenomenal. In their reporting, they said that America was moving towards two separate communities, one black, one white, one well-off, one not so much, right? And when they talked about the urban ghetto in the language of the Kerner Report, again, these are white men, largely white men. Otto Kerner, the former governor of Illinois, was made the chairperson. There were so many leaders who were part of this, of industry and of politics, that were put together by this executive order, but primarily white men. They came and said that the urban ghetto, right, is that white institutions create it, white institutions maintain it, and white institutions support it. These are white men. And it was so powerful that a statement that LBJ really didn't want it to come out, right? Because in real sense, LBJ thought the issue was going to be the pathology, the perceived pathology of black families, as opposed to the racial discrimination being suffered by those families in the communities in which they resided, right? And so the investments in education, in housing, in jobs, we've got a document. You see how thick this is, that has so many solutions
Solutions.
yet we've not enacted them. So we have a document, a racial equity plan, solutions, but they've not been adopted. The proper investment has not been made. So here's where we're talking about Dr. King and how radical he was. Okay, let's talk about a radical proposal that has come before us in many municipalities all across the nation that has been a dividing marker when it shouldn't be, right? And I think a lot of it has to do with the rhetoric that has come around it rather than the policy itself. So particularly following the death of George Floyd, and I've been connected with that family and been invited to speak at their weekend of enlightenment that recognizes, commemorates his death. You have this movement that was called the defund movement. Okay, defund the police, and that made with great resistance from some communities. Right now, I think that's a lot about language. In essence, the defund movement was saying, take a portion. Some of them were. Some were arguing for much more. But the majority were saying, take a portion of the budget you already have enacted each and every year and put it towards programs that actually address the inequities in your city, right? So instead of giving $500 million a year to a institution, take 50 million of it and redirect it. Take 100 million of it and redirect it on the grounds to actually solve the issues that the department says they can't solve themselves. Now, to me, that's not as radical as some might propose. To me, that's just common sense. I was invited to sit on a panel 3 years ago. Actually, more than that. It's more like 4 years ago. At the time, it was the sitting police chief, a man who worked in police data for over 30 years, a professor, myself, and a state legislator. We're sitting on this panel talking about policing and crime in our country. And the data man at the very end, he made a statement that I never forgot. He said that the same places that have been issues of struggle for us for the last 30 years are the places of issue and struggle today. And I'm thinking to myself, what business model continues to operate in such a fashion that they are fine with having the same issues in the same places for the last 3 decades? At some point, you interrogate yourself and say, we must be missing the mark. We're doing something wrong. What can we do different? Okay. So what if we invest in mental health, which I think should come actually from higher up, from elected officials, but let's say we invest more in mental health. What happens if we place the money in education or we place some money in housing, right? We're now beginning to address some of the root causes of the issues being faced within some of these communities. All right. So that was a long answer, but that's my main issue, is that we do a fairly good job of identifying the issues, but have not done as well as putting forth the policies, enacting the policies, carrying them forth to actually change the issues.
100% agree. You know, one of the things we're working on as an organization here for this 2024 year is a racial equity underwriting toolkit. And what we're doing is we're bringing together legislators, regulators, banks, credit unions, and CDFI community lenders to examine their underwriting policies. And we're creating a toolkit or a guide so that lenders and investors and people that are in a financial services space can create more racially equitable policies and strategies within their underwriting criteria. This is something, when you talk about the racial equity plan for the city of Dallas, directly ties and correlates to some of the inequities or some of the strategies, solutions that they've pinpointed, right? Addressing not only gentrification and displacement from a perspective of housing or residents, but also business, right? We've been looking at data points that overlay race in the city, but then overlay representation of businesses in those same communities. And we see that those communities that are impoverished, or those communities that lack resources that are typically Black or Hispanic, also lack opportunities for businesses to actually even go into starting and growing a business in a certain zip code. And so those are some of the things that we're addressing. But I think there has to be more communication, a more coordinated of resources of the philanthropic community, the corporate community, more public-private partnerships coming together, and then engaging those practitioners like us, the other organizations, the Black Chamber, all these other organizations that are working on the ground to make a concerted effort to make sure that those efforts have the resources they need to even address, the challenges when you talk about enacting the policy. And that's where I feel like what you said earlier about people accuse Martin Luther King of not having a plan, right, and having a vision. He had a very detailed plan.
Sure.
We just focused on the vision, and I think as a city, as a community, as a whole, we have to look at it the same way, right? Like, what is the actual plan? But then, who's going to execute it? Who owns that plan?
Well,
and that's what it comes down to.
Dr. King was a truth teller, and when you are a truth teller, prophetic, however you say it, that comes with great risk to yourself. But Dr. King very clearly articulated the issues that were before us. And again, we have to have the courage to enact them. The gentleman by the name of Dr. Hickle, and there may be some other questions. I just want to, for the viewing audience, things that you might want to look into. Economic professor called Dr. Hickle has a book called The Divide. And phenomenal book where he looks at how much money was built for this nation through chattel slavery, in terms of the unpaid wages that would have been due to our enslaved ancestors.
Yeah.
And he estimates the amount of money owed at $97 trillion. Okay. And the reason I bring that up is that twofold. One, it speaks of the level of investment made in our nation, right? To make it to have the greatest economy in the world and to reach the status that it now has. Right. But it also speaks to the amount of money that would have been rightly due to our community that has been withheld. The reality is that Black poverty, right, has been created by white supremacy. There's no way of disconnecting that. Not just chattel slavery. We can talk about that. And that really is important to talk about. But it's also Jim Crow. It's not just Jim Crow. It's the redlining policies that move from Jim Crow. It's not just redlining policies. It's the fact that the GI Bill was not given and enacted with all communities the same, right? It's the burning down of Wall Street in Tulsa. Right? Yeah. All of this economic harm has brought us to where we are. So if we're going to repair it, right, that's not going to simply happen with job training. Is job training important? Yes, it is. But you're not going to eradicate the issues of $97 trillion being removed from a community simply by training for jobs, right? There has to be a more robust involvement.
Yeah, takes too much time.
A reconstruction. Where have we heard that term? There needs to be a reconstruction of our society, and we've yet to accomplish it. And so in many ways, the civil rights movement is known as the second Reconstruction era. And Bishop William Barber says we're now entering into the third.
Wow. Well, I'm going to leave the folks that are tuning in. Again, thank you all for tuning in on this MLK Day with a stat that came from, I think it was a recent study that came from maybe a Harvard Business Journal or another. I can't remember where the exact source, but I will find that. But the statistic says that by the year 2054, the net worth of Black and Hispanic communities will reach zero or negative. Right? If we continue at the rate that we're continuing now, the wealth gap or the household wealth of Black communities, the average, will reach $0 or negative. That is a stat that we are tracking and looking at on a local level here in Dallas. And I want to ask, you with this final word that you'll leave with us, what does that mean to you from a social justice perspective? And how should we be continuing to keep the dream alive, but also keeping in mind both social justice and economic justice?
Well, I think that an important word here is about embodiment and moving just from the data point in the numbers to lived in realities in human lives. Okay. There was a study that came out last week that said that if a certain percentage of your income is given to rent, then you are expected to have a 20-year shorter life expectancy.
Wow.
Isn't that something? That if so much of your hard work and labor goes just to keep a roof over your head, that diminishes the outcomes in terms of the years of life that you will live. Okay. To your point, we talk about, zero wealth and wealth building. It's not just about luxuries.
Right.
What it feels like to me, what I hear as someone who serves in our community, even as a pastor, it's the reach out that I have even before we got on the platform today. In the midst of the cold and ice, can the church help with anything? Because we're hungry, right? Can the church help with anything? We're getting ready to lose our home. Can the church help with anything? We can't afford our prescription medication. Can the church help with it? That's what it feels like. Okay. People who are attempting to live in the midst of so many social and economic harms. Okay. There are lives on the line. I say this in my book, that white supremacy comes with a body count. And unfortunately, that's what we have to look at. That's what they recognize. These are not just numbers. This is not just, these are people who are. This is the decision between keeping the lights on and feeding myself today. Right? Those are the existential decisions that our neighbors are making. So let's bring Dr. King to the fore. As he was in Birmingham jail, penning these words around the margins of a newspaper, where he so poignantly stated that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. That we are woven together in a single garment of destiny, that what impacts one impacts us all, right? And so, in a real sense, when we're able to make the mental, metaphysical shift to the fact that those children over there without food are not just those children, those are our children. That senior over there asking the question between literally some of our seniors eating dog food because that's all that they can afford, versus being nourished given the service that they've given to our communities for decades. That's not just an elder over there. That's my grandmother. That's my grandfather. I'm claiming. When we are able to claim each other as a part of the human family, there's certain things that we allow to happen to our family members, to our neighbors, that we would not stand for. So
Right.
Dr. King, in his final book, here it is. Where do we go from here?
We go from here.
Last chapter is called The World House. And it all begins about this unpublished script of people who live under one roof, and they have to figure out how to live together or perish together. So here we're all in this world house. Global warming is going to impact us all. We're all in this world house. The economic strengths before us is going to impact us all. We're all in this world house, not properly educating our children to serve as leaders in the next generation. It's going to impact us all, right? Those are the final words of Dr. King to us. Learn to live together as brothers and sisters, or perish together as fools. And that is the same urgent word that comes to us today. Learn to live together as a human family, or you'll ultimately suffer together side by side.
Wow. Man, Pastor Wallace, thank you so much for joining me today and joining us as a community and having these community conversations. This is you actually happen to be the first guest of this series of community conversations, and I think this was such a poignant way to really just ignite the message, the conversation, the dialogue that not just keeps us here, but moves us towards action. And I think that's what we're trying to do as an organization, that we're trying to do as society. And thank you for contributing to that and blessing us with that message. One of the things that I'm taking away from this for myself is to continue to be a student of the word. When I say the word, I mean the leaders that we lift up and that we idolize, and that we don't just take the snippets in the quotes that we like. Do your research, do your homework. I'm picking up all these books if I don't already have them in my iPhone, on my Audible. If you're listening out there, challenge yourself to pick up a book of your favorite, community leader, right? It doesn't have to be MLK. I know this is MLK Day and we're celebrating his legacy, but truly dive into the words that these people are saying, and you'll find that there's nothing new under the sun.
Right.
I didn't know that Martin Luther King was talking about automation and we young people, we think that that's a new term, and we talk about AI, and AI has been around forever, right? With the assembly lines, right? Like, and how that's changed. That's AI, right?
Right.
And so I'm taking away from this is to continue to be a steward and read the messages, read the words that these leaders and these folks that are saying, and not just taking the word, from these snippets and from these social media pint-sized things that we feel like we have them and now we know them. Like you said, people think that they know them, but they really don't. And so this has been such a insightful and fruitful conversation. I appreciate you for all the work that you do in the community, Pastor Waters, and those that are joining. We're kicking off this community conversation, and I mean, I don't know the next person up, they might not be able to top Pastor Waters. So, but this has been a great conversation. Thank you all for tuning in. Please stay safe out there. I know it's a little icy here in Dallas, if you're in Dallas or in DFW, and we will see you all soon. So thank you very much, and enjoy this day.